Welcome to the CPI repository. In today's video, we show you how to edit your metadata files to add a new batch of samples. To get started, navigate to the metadata part of the website by clicking here. Once you are on the metadata page, click on My Metadata to expand a table with all your personal metadata files. For each metadata file, you have the option to view the metadata, edit the metadata, download the metadata file, or download a sample sheet that is used by a connected facility, such as the sequencing facility, to process the samples. For our example, we are going to add a new batch of samples to the metadata file for the project with the ID LOS34, which we created in the first metadata video. In this project, samples of mice with LAD ligation-induced myocardial infarction were compared with samples of mice that underwent sham surgery. You can find the video on our channel. Let's start the editing process by clicking on the Edit button. We are now navigated to the metadata input mask, which is already filled with the information that was saved in the metadata file. In the first section, general details about the project, like project name, description, or owner, are collected. For our example, we only want to add new samples, so we do not need to edit this section. We can go straight to the next part by clicking here. Now we are in the second section where details about the experimental setting are collected. This is the place where we need to add our new samples. All samples need to be specified within an experimental setting. We already created one such setting when we first filled in the metadata. The saved setting can be found at the bottom of the page. Every experimental setting has a unique setting ID that is set automatically. For our first setting, it is EXP1. For our new samples, we now need to create a second experimental setting. The setting ID is already created as EXP2. To start the process of adding the new samples, we first need to specify the organism. Here we select mouse, like we did for the old samples. Then we lock it by clicking on the check mark. Now we need to enter the experimental factors by clicking here. Let's say our new batch contains 3 samples of mice with LAD ligation-induced myocardial infarction and 3 samples of sham-injured mice. To represent this, we select injury as our experimental factor. The injury status is set to injured, and the injury type is stated with LAD ligation and sham. Once we filled that in, we save the factor. Now we filled in all the factors we need for our new batch of samples and can click here to generate the conditions. If you are not sure how to figure out which information qualifies as an experimental factor, please watch our video about experimental factors where this is explained. Now we select the conditions we investigated. In our example, these are the condition with sham injury and the condition with LAD ligation injury. Once selected, the conditions are displayed below where we can add samples. First, we enter the samples for the sham surgery. Therefore, we click here to open the sample dialog. Before we add a new sample, we need to fill in some additional information. For our example, let's say the mice were 8 days old and the sample was collected 3 days after the sham surgery. Once we filled that in, we can click here to save the sample. Since all our samples contain the same additional information, we can now use the copy and paste button to create 2 more samples. Now that all samples are entered, we can save the condition. Next, we enter the samples for our LAD ligation condition by clicking here. Here our mice are also 8 days old, and the samples were collected 3 days after surgery, so we fill that in on the left side. Additionally, the LAD ligation caused a myocardial infarction, so we can add this under disease. Once we filled everything out, we can save the sample by clicking here. Now we can again utilize the copy and paste button to add 2 more samples, just like we did in the sham condition. Then we click here to save the condition. With this, we finished the input of our new batch of samples. The last thing we need to do now is save the experimental setting by clicking here. The new setting is now saved together with the first setting. We can now go on to the next section. In this section, information on the technical details are collected. Here we need to put in the techniques with which the samples are to be processed. As shown in the warning message at the top, the technique for our new experimental setting is still missing, so we need to add it. To do that, we first type in exp2 as our setting ID. Then we add the technique with single nucleotide RNA-seq. Once this is done, we can save the technique. With this, we did all necessary edits on this page and can go on to the finish section. On this page, we can now have a look at the summary. If everything is correct, we can save the metadata file. There are two options for saving. The first option saves your metadata file in the CPI repository and redirects you to the metadata main page. The second option does the same, with the addition of downloading the metadata file together with an updated sample sheet that is needed for the processing of samples by the respective facility. With this, the editing process is finished. For more details on the CPI repository, please visit our channel. Thank you for listening, and please feel free to contact us at bcu.support@mpi-bn.mpg.de.